Have you ever sat down on the top of a mountain, maybe out on a rocky outtop, maybe if you've been fortunate enough to be above the tree line? Have you ever sat up there with friends, maybe some trail food? You feel like you can just see forever, don't you? There's 6 days. After 6 days, the passage says, and surely it's a reference back to the story in Exodus linking Jesus and Moses. But chronologically, it falls in Matthew's story 6 days after Jesus asked the disciples a question of identity. Who do you say I am? And Peter answered, you are the Christ. And Jesus affirms Peter as a leader and says, you are Peter the rock. And on this church, I will use you to share the good news with the whole world. 6 days after Jesus had this moment, he quickly begins to teach them that he must suffer, that he will go to Jerusalem, that he will be handed over to the religious and governmental leaders, and he will be treated unjustly, unfairly, and crucified. And on the third day, he will rise. And Peter grabs hold of Jesus, the text says. He grabs Jesus. He holds Jesus. And the scripture says he scolds Jesus. But I wonder if it's not more of a heart kind of pleading and scolding. Oh Lord, this should never happen to you. 6 days after all of this, Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John, and they go to the top of a very high mountain. Who are you traveling with? Do you have spiritual friends accompanying you as you process this life? As you seek to live into God's calling for your life? When was the last time somebody asked you the question that the early Methodists ask each other every week? How is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? On Wednesday, I sat with the bishop and about 10 other pastors, some of who are pastoring churches that are deeply divided over disaffiliation. We shared our souls. I saw colleagues weeping. I put my hand on a friend's shoulder. I noticed feet moving under the table, nervously shuffling. I heard sympathetic, unmuted sighs. You know, Zoom and Facebook, they're wonderful tools, aren't they? But you know what? They don't always cross that soul space to be present, to bear one another up, to hold one another. I hope I'm more Christ-like. For the time I spent with my colleagues and seeing their tears, I hope I'm a little more faithful and a little more insightful, just for being in the presence of others, wrestling to follow Christ. You know, I think maybe Jesus needed time away with these coworkers, with these spiritual friends. You know, these three will be the ones who try to stay awake with Jesus all night in the Garden of Gethsemane. There's Peter, this rock this courageous kind of leader, not afraid to get his feet wet and to step outside of the boat. And there's Peter, who's willing to take hold of Jesus and say, Lord, surely you've got this wrong. And there's John, who's John's gospel calls the beloved disciple. And then there's James, who, is a bit of a contrarian. Martin Luther didn't even want to put James's book in the Bible because it kind of tweaked his faith. He takes these up on the mountain with him. Don't we all need others? Don't we all need others to help us tend to our own souls? And Jesus doesn't take all 12 disciples. You ever thought about that? Doesn't take all 12. He doesn't take with him Magdalene or Mary or Salome, who he will ordain on Easter as the first preachers. He doesn't take them. And he doesn't take with him Matthew, and he doesn't take with him Luke. And they could have, had a first-hand knowledge of what happened up there, but he doesn't take them. Why just these three? And Jesus doesn't take with him the crowds. Did you notice that? He goes up there with these spiritual friends. I think because he needed to hear these words. And wasn't it the first temptation? We'll talk about temptation next week as we begin Lent. But isn't the devil's whole temptation to get Jesus to do some big showy miracle to show the world who he might be? Get yourself up on top of that mountain. Get up on top of the temple up there, Throw yourself down, then glide down to the ground there, and then go right inside the temple and clean up that mess, and then head over to Pilate's place and clean up that mess, and then go clean up Herod's mess and sit on a throne. But that's not the way that God works. No, the message comes with three in Jesus. Matthew 14, just 2 chapters before, or 3 chapters before this story, recounts the disgusting, cruel murder of John the Baptist while in Herod's custody. And I wonder if John's murder brought into light the cross to Jesus. Matthew tells us that when Jesus heard about John, Jesus withdrew in a boat to a deserted place to be by himself. When do we step away from that constant running news cycle? I got it on my watch now, right? I'm not sure that's an improvement. You can be having a great day and here's news, And Jesus breaks the cycle. He goes away. He says, come away to a deserted place. And last week we heard this wonderful word from 3 preachers, Ingrid and Liza and Lewis, about their trip to Mexico and the immersion experience there. And in that, they're preaching out of Mark 6, and in the story, there's this little detail. It says that the disciples had so many people pressing in on them that they didn't have time to eat. Now, we may just gloss right over that, but have you ever been so busy you didn't even have time to eat, and you looked at your watch and said, oh my gosh, it's 2 o'clock, and that's why I'm a little hangry. And my staff will tell you that they know to sometimes tell me, hey, go eat lunch. And Jesus says to them, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while. And we know when the boat got across the lake, the crowd had run around and Jesus got no rest. In his compassion, he poured himself out even more. But Jesus goes up on a mountain with 3 deeply committed disciples. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white like lightning. And Moses and Elijah appear with them and talks with them. And sometimes we preachers beat up Peter, We say, oh, Peter, you want to put up these shrines? Well, that's exactly what they did in Exodus 34. They put up 12 shrines. But Jesus, they don't put up any shrines. They talk about the experience, but Jesus says, don't tell anybody about this, because I believe that the work of Jesus isn't up on the mountaintop. It's down in the valley where there are people in need. There are people that need to be fed. There's people who need homeless children, who need advocates. There's work out there to be done, and Jesus is always out there with the people. But I think Jesus needed this time away worshiping, conversing on the mountaintop. Jesus needed to come away with spiritual friends to feel the warm light of God on his face, to hear the word, you are my beloved child. Your words have worth. And I noticed something about this passage. Jesus, there's no mention of a mirror. This is my wife's mirror. There's no mention of a mirror. Now, why does that matter? Well, without a mirror, how do you know your face is shining like the sun? How do you know? Well, your friends tell you, don't they? They see that light in you. They see the light of God shining through you. I believe Jesus needed to have all of that affirmation. Classical orthodoxy has always taught us that Jesus was fully divine and fully human. And we always focus on the fully divine parts, the big miracle part, but the human part is beautiful too. And surely we human beings need others to walk with us and spot the light in us and to say to us, you are beloved, you are of worth, you are loved by God, your life matters, you have something to do and say for God in this world. Oh, brothers and sisters, don't be afraid to say to one another, you are beloved, you are beautiful, you are of sacred worth. And maybe the divine side of Jesus' life, maybe it needed this as well. In Isaiah 8 and 9, the prophet speaks for God, and hear the hurt and compassion in God's voice. The Lord speaks, because my people are crushed, I am crushed. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Oh, if my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears, I would weep all day and all night for the wounds of my people. As the cross looms before Jesus, Jesus goes up on the mountain and God says, you are beloved. The light shines on Jesus' face on the mountain of transfiguration, but it doesn't shine all around Jesus when he stands before Pilate or when he's in the crucible of the cross. In fact, Luke tells us the sun stopped shining, and friends, like our youth choir often sings that song about belief when the sun is not even shining. Oh, sometimes we need these holy words poured into us. You are beloved. And we need to pour them into one another. These deep assurances, they give us strength, don't they? In the most difficult moments. Today, if you look around and say, where are young people? Well, they're off on retreat. Thanks be to God. Gail's with them. Emma's with them. Next week, Heather's leading a retreat. Next week, I'll be in the Iris room. And on Wednesday night. There are all kinds of groups at this church, many of them during the discipleship hour, just before the service, that are meeting, that are seeing the light of God in one another, that are helping one another walk and do the things that God is calling them to do. Oh, friends. May we take time May we take time. May we make an intentional journey up the mountain. May we seek spiritual friends to do this life with, people who can help spot the light of God in us. And may we be people who spot the light of God into others and speak the radical love and grace of Jesus Christ into other people's lives, to say to others, you are beloved. You are of sacred worth. God can use you to shine light into this world. Oh, friends, Jesus said, you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Oh, may those words uphold you that you are beloved. In the lowest moments, may they give you strength. And in the most beautiful moments, may they fill you with joy. May you hear the good news. You are beloved. You are of sacred worth. You are dearly loved by God, and God will use you to do beautiful things in this world. Do not be afraid. Amen.